Shalom and welcome to Simchat Yisrael. This week's Parsha, Re'eh, presents Judaism with one of its most divisive and controversial dilemmas. Why can't I eat cheeseburgers? Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel down below. In our pleasure-dominated culture, the cheeseburger may be the ultimate symbol of self-indulgence. And yet faithful Jews are forever denied the pleasure of this cuisine because unfortunately for us, cheeseburgers are the classic example of non-kosher food. According to Jewish kashrut law, meat and dairy products cannot be mixed together or consumed at the same time. The problem with this is that if you look in the Torah, you won't find a passage that actually commands this. It would seem like such a simple thing to say, "Thou shalt not cook meat and milk together." But the actual written Torah expresses this law very differently. The verse from this week's Parsha, from which we derive this kashrut law, states, "You are not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk." Millions of hungry Jews over the years have rationalized, well, I'm not literally boiling a kid in its mother's milk, so I can eat this cheeseburger without breaking any commandments. Why does the written Torah say one thing and the oral tradition tell us something different? For that matter, why do we need any more laws in the first place? We already have 613 of them. Isn't that more than enough? Doesn't the addition of even more rules and regulations simply get in the way of achieving the level of spirituality that God wants us to attain? If the purpose of Torah is to guide us spiritually, wouldn't we be better served if we just talked about concepts like love and peace? What's with all these laws and minutiae? How can you have a loving relationship with God based around following rules? The thing about the Torah is that the greater part of it is pretty mundane. Sure, there are some great and noble commandments, but the vast majority of it is just little details. But so is life. It's like hiking in the mountains. Every once in a while, you get to an amazing summit or a breathtaking vista, but in between those peaks is the trudge, the seemingly endless miles of plain old, uninteresting forest that separate one highlight from another. That's kind of like life. Sure, there are incredible moments in all our lives, getting married, having kids, taking vacations, but in between, we all have our own daily trudges of commuting, board meetings, and picking up the kids from school. So how are we to approach life? Do we just put up with the trudge in order to get to the exciting parts? Or is there value to be had in the trudge as well? The Torah's position is very clear. There is great value to be found in the trudge, in the mundane details of life. That's where law comes in. The purpose of law is to take the great ideals like love and peace and find ways for us to express them in our everyday lives. If we don't, then everyday life truly is just a trudge, mundane and meaningless. Torah takes the trudge and transforms it into a beautiful mountaintop of its own. If we fail to act out these great values, we risk losing our understanding of them. Imagine a man who loves his wife. All day long, he sits and meditates on how much he loves her, how special she is to him, what a unique and wonderful person she is. Meanwhile, his wife is taking care of the baby and cleaning the house and doing all the cooking by herself. Eventually, she will come to him and tell him that if he really loves her, he won't just think about it, he will act on it, even if it's in small, mundane ways, like helping out in the kitchen or changing some diapers. These things elevate the idea of love into a true act of love. So what does all of this have to do with why I can't eat a cheeseburger? Just as that man brought the great ideal of love into the everyday acts of mundane housework, the Torah gives us the opportunity to take the ideals of justice, kindness, and mercy and transform them into actions that we can do every day. This is where the oral tradition comes in. Where the written Torah will express a principle, the traditions will find a way for us to express that in our everyday lives. So in our case, there is a principle presented in the Torah, the value of all living things. We have been given permission by God to kill and consume animals, but there are limits. We have to understand what it is we are doing when we take the life of another living creature for food. Milk is more than something that you buy at a store. It's a source of life. It's how a mother nurtures her child. Meat is the opposite of milk. It's the death of an animal. We have permission to eat meat and drink milk, but to boil a kid in its own mother's milk would be treating sacred things like life and death as mere ingredients. That's the ideal presented in Torah. But how does this ideal make its way into my everyday life? The oral tradition tells us how. We're going to keep meat and milk separate. Every day when I have a glass of milk or eat meat, I'll remember that these things don't go together, and I'll understand why they don't go together. If we keep these laws during our trudges, if we take an ideal and make it part of our everyday lives, we elevate the mundane into something far greater than we ever imagined. The trudge ceases to be a boring walk from place to place, and instead becomes a great adventure in its own right. A simple trip to the grocery store can become the realization of a great ideal. and choosing to order that burger without cheese can become an act of holiness. Shalom and thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to visit simchatyisrael.org to learn more.